Good morning. We continue to look for the Bible story for today. God ruled Israel through the Samuel who was chosen by God as a leader of the Israel. After long years, Samuel was getting older, and Samuel selected his two sons as a leader of Israel, and he came back to his hometown. But his sons were not a good leader like him. They were only interested in satisfying their own needs and did not lead Israel well. So some people of Israel came to Samuel and think that they need a new leader. So they said to Samuel, "You are old, and your sons doesn't live as you do. Give us king to rule over us like all other nations." They thought they also need a king. They thought when they have a king like other nations, a king would lead their army and win the battles and wars. But the reason that Israel was under attack was they turned away from God. It was not because they did not have a king. However, the Israelites did not believe that God is ruling and protecting them, and thought it is better for them to have a king who is strong and mighty. Even though Samuel said that they will be regretted for having a king later, the people of Israel continually asked to choose a king for them, and after all, God accepted their ask. God decided to lead Israel through the king, who was chosen as the first king of the Israel. God said to Samuel, "Tomorrow I will send a man from the tribe of Benjamin. You will select him as a king of Israel." Next day, as God told, a man came to Samuel. His name was Saul. Samuel told to Saul, "You will be the first king of Israel." But Saul thought he would not be qualified as the king of Israel, so he just humbly said to Samuel, "I am the tribe of Benjamin. It is the smallest family in Israel, and my family is the smallest in Benjamin's family. How could I be a king of Israel?" But next morning Samuel brought Saul to the outside, and Samuel took a jar of the oil and poured out it onto Samuel. It is the sign that God chose him, and especially as a king. This was a direction from God to appoint the king of Israel. Like this, God confirmed that Saul is the first king of the Israel. A couple of days later, Samuel called the people of Israel to Mitzvah, the name of the city. Samuel told to the people of Israel, "As you ask, God select a king for you. See who is chosen as your king." People of Israel were so happy. Look how they are happy with their new king. And lastly, Samuel explained to Saul the right and the duties of the king. And he told how Saul should rule Israel. Even though Saul was the king who rules Israel, he need to follow God's way. Like this. We want to be a king of our life. And sometimes we put other things as the king of our life. But We need to remember that God is the true King of our life and of the world. So we need to follow His way, even though we are the King of the world. God is the King, and He is the true and only King. Amen. See you next Sunday.